Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to James Way's Webinar Wednesdays. We have a special edition this week. We're lucky enough to have our technical consultants in-house here with us. And so we thought we would do an Ask Us Anything program. So this program is really going to be driven by you, the viewers, giving us questions that you have on your hatchery, be it about multi-stage, single stage, ventilation, or just any other general questions you may have. As you all pretty much know, I'm Victoria Frail. I'm the Training and Documentation Manager here. This week I am joined by three of our four consultants. Jerry Garrison unfortunately was unable to be with us, but we're sure he's watching out there somewhere. So first I have Lynette Price.
Hello.
Philip Perry.
Hi. And
Bill Bennett.
Good morning, afternoon.
I'm sure these are friendly faces to all of you as they are out there visiting hatcheries every day, helping you solve all your issues, get your machine started up, and everything else. So as this is just an open forum, we have no presentation today. It's all going to be based on questions. So you can enter all your questions in the top left of the screen. There'll be that control panel. There's a Q&A button there. So if you drop your question into the Q&A, that will send it right through to us. I can look at it right here and we can answer your question live. I'd also like to thank everyone who sent in some questions by email in advance. That's really great. And I think we'll start off there. First of all, for Bill, we have a question from Daniel. He's asking, are there any special considerations for operating a hatchery in a hot and humid climate? Is it extra difficult? Are the warm temperatures an asset? And is there a difference in performance of James Way machines in various climates?
First, I'd like to state that if a hatchery is properly ventilated and controlled, then it doesn't matter if it's in a hot climate or a cold climate, because the room will be conditioned exactly the same. Doesn't matter where the hatchery is in the world. So to answer the question, ventilation is the key to that.
Okay. And so do we see any performance differences or not as long as the
Not as long as the ventilation is correct. If the ventilation's not correct, then yes, there's differences.
Yeah, and I agree with that, right? If your ventilation is off, your machines are going to be off because they're expecting that certain quality of air. And if they're not getting it, they won't be happy, basically. Lynette, we have a question that just came in from Kevin. He has multi-stage tunnels with PS501 controllers. He's having a calcium buildup on his wicks, causing them to dry out. So he's wondering what a solution has been, and he has been talking to Ronald on several solutions. They've been soaking their wicks in a dish of Downy, and he feels that he's still having some drying out in certain incubators. So I'm guessing not across all of them. So what do you think?
Well, I mean, the fabric softener, yes, it does help quite a bit, but one thing that I would be wondering is, what is the quality of water that you have? Does it have more chlorine in it? Does it have other, say, chemicals? Minerals, yes, thank you, Philip. But I'll just say normally, the fabric softener usually clears that problem up, unless you've seen other situations either. I mean, because say when
normally it's a mineral content in the water is too hard.
But the bleaching could be possibly, in other words, too much bleaching, and that can cause, even if it depends on the bleach process.
Okay, the bleach process on the wicks themselves.
On the from, say, wherever our supplier is.
Right.
And that's where, in other words, say in the U.S., in other words, Danny Walker he could find, in other words, and contact our suppliers and tell them that we were having this problem.
Okay. So yeah, I think maybe we'll look into that and see if that's something prevalent. If there's anyone else out there who's also having that issue as of late, please let us know, because then we can maybe do a bit more of a deep dig So for Kevin, should he just continue with the Downy treatments? Will that progressively improve?
Well, it doesn't say necessarily have to be Downy. It might be
But a fabric
some
softener.
type of fabric softener, yes.
All right. Thank you for that, Kevin. Krista, can you translate? We have something in Spanish there. So for Philip, we had a question from Juan, and it came through email. Juan is asking if there are different on-farm and incubation procedures depending on the breed or strain, and the example he gave is from Ross to Cobb.
Yes, there is differences. The cob runs hotter toward the end, and so we have specific profiles for different breeds for the Ross and the cob.
And those profiles are readily available from any of our consultants, correct? To look at the differences between those. And I've heard that it said that the cob birds are maybe a warmer bird, or they have more embryonic heat. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
They definitely produce more embryonic heat than, say, a Avigen, say 308 or a 508 or 708, is the same as, say, a cob 500 or a cob 700.
Great. And then we have a question. This is emailed in from David. He has P120 machines and P40 hatchers, and he's finding that his chicks are suffocating in the corner trolleys in the middle 5 trays on those P40 hatchers across all his hatchers. He's had the issue since changing to those cob birds, and his room and plenum pressures across those P40 cabinets are 0.015 in the room, which is at the top end of our recommendations, and negative 0.04 in the plenum reference to the room, so also within our recommendations. So guys, any ideas there on what's going on for him?
Well, I think all three of us were built. I mean, you can,
I would be looking closer to incubator, because if it's crossed all the hatchers, then most likely you're overheating them in the incubator, which back to that's an airflow issue. So, my first question is, the pressures you give us, is that from your monitoring system or from an actual meter? You should use a meter. That will tell you if the pressures is correct.
Yeah, verify that your
Yes.
guardian system there is actually reading.
And also verify that the
correctly.
fans is rotating in the right direction. That's a big one, that if they're not rotating in the right direction, that's where they're going to come from.
well, especially after 14 days to 18 days.
Yes.
In other words, and you can monitor this by your numeric report on Hatchcom, and then also your detailed statistical report. But if it's cooling too much, you're going to have temperature differentials in that machine.
Okay.
In other words, whether it's in the corners, and it all depends on where in the incubator, like Bill's pointing out, that what position they are at in the machine. Because if it's excessively cooling, then you're going to get temperature differentials top to bottom.
So what would you call excessive cooling? Is there a cooling percent on time that would be excessive, or
75%, 80% is entirely too much of these two.
Once it
gentlemen.
gets up to 70%, then that's our threshold.
Okay.
We don't like to see any more than 70% cool.
With P129s or P120s, if you can keep it in even the 40% category or even less than that, in which you can achieve that, but it does not need to be excessive whatsoever.
Okay. So some ideas on things to check. Anything else?
I'd just like to mention that I've seen a similar problem with matting of the chick down or the fluff in the fans in the hatcher. The particular hatchery was using humidification, and it got out of sync with the profile. So when the profile wanted to raise humidity should have been being lowered at that time. And so you had all this excessive fluff, all this excessive water, and it just matted right on the fan guard.
Okay.
And it would not allow enough air to flow through the hatcher fan. So
Yeah,
that might be,
Like Philip's saying, the hatch window is entirely off.
yeah.
In other words, with say if you had a profile at 510, 512 hours, it may be completely off. And
Yeah.
yes.
If they're hatching earlier than that, then your humidity's rising.
Yeah.
So if your
Yeah.
chicks are coming out early, it could also be a
For sure.
concern.
So David, I don't know if you you were able to join us for our first webinar with Philip, where we did discuss hatch window and being able to see your hatch window from your hatcher through Hatchcom. But that is up on the Jamesway YouTube. It's just Jamesway webinars on YouTube. And there's also a link from our website on the Webinar Wednesdays page. So you can check that out there as well. And definitely continue to email us as you find different things, and we'll see if we can get this sorted out for you as quickly as possible.
Well, one little small item that I'd like to add is this: is if you have, say, with the hatch window, but if also make sure that you're setting, say, your oldest flocks to the outside, your peak flocks in the middle, and your young flocks closest to the ECU.
Okay, let's see here. I have a quick one from Mike, and he's asking our thoughts on steam humidification in hatcheries.
Yeah.
I think the guys will agree with me. Myself, from my experience, I did design ventilation here at Jamesway for 6 years. Is that steam humidification requires a lot of maintenance. It is extremely costly compared to other options out there. And for those reasons, it's really not something that we have offered. I know that our friends out in Western Canada find a benefit there, or feel there's a benefit there. But in general, it's certainly not something I would recommend, just because most hatcheries that I know that have them aren't exactly happy with them, and they're just very cost prohibitive and very maintenance heavy. Would you guys agree?
100%.
Yes.
Correct.
And that's from experience.
Yeah, yeah.
I had steam humidification in a pedigree hatchery, and it was a constant just troubleshooting, keeping it going. It was always down, and water quality was a very big issue. It had to be, water had to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of things involved with steam humidification. That there's a lot more simpler products out there that we carry as well. And does a great job.
I have a question from Jeff. He is running Super J Multistage machines, incubators, at 98.7 and 84 wet bulb. Their total incubation time is more than 509 hours. He says it's closer to 514. So two-part question: what should the entrance end temperatures be? And should he lower the set temperatures as they are over 509 due to transfer times? They're currently hatching anywhere from 20 to 28 hatchers per day. Sorry, that. So
that sounds like a pretty long profile. I mean, for that window.
But it's still it's multi-stage. Is that correct, Victoria?
multi-stage Super J's, yeah.
At 98.7.
At 98.7 and 84 wet bulb.
First, you need to confirm your entrance in temperature 24 hours after transfer to see if you're getting the heat through the eggs, and if you're getting the correct temperature at the crossbar, which should be somewhere around 100.3 with a 98.7. 100.2 is acceptable. I think what you'll find that that temperature is probably lower. Question to him would be, are you leveling fourth or the fifth position also.
Because you do not.
Because
If
if your temperatures is low, you don't level that. You leave it turning.
you leave it turning. I mean, another thing is, a question I have for him is, what is the, what type of flat does he have? Does he have 42 egg flats, SST flats?
What breed?
What breed? And then also, what are the pressure differentials in the machine? In other words, because you need a total cabinet pressure, and that's measuring, like Bill says, with a instrument, a manometer. And it needs to be, say, if you have, say, in a regular Super J of, say, a total cabinet pressure, and that's from the entrance end back to the exit end. And let's just say if it's 0.50 total cabinet pressure, and to make and reassure that you have that 60-40 ratio, then you need to check with the manometer by pushing the little 1/4-inch tubing or airline tubing outside the hallway, and then how negative is it on the entrance end, then going to the exit end. And like Bill said, this is with the fifth one, the sixth one level, and then the other 5 turn. And you want it to be 40% positive on the exit end. Again, same procedure, tube outside of the exit end. And if you have a 0.50 positive total cabinet pressure, it should be like negative 0.30 on the entrance end and positive 0.20 on the exit end to have a 60-40 ratio.
60-40 ratio.
And that's with a fixed damper opening of 1.5 inch.
1.5, 1.25 in that range, yeah.
And I think we have a paper on that, don't we?
Yes.
An educational paper on measuring your cabinet pressures on a multi-stage. So Jeff, if you don't have that, you can email us at webinars@jamesway.com and I'll get that out to you. Jeff did add that he has the 42 egg flats and he levels the 5th and 6th position.
Should not level the 5th.
Especially if you're having a low temperature condition and slower than normal hatch.
And with that added to that, you're not going to have a 60-40 with the 5th and the 6th level.
Okay.
Now, you were going to say something?
I would just, the calibration, I would just ensure that your calibrator has been certified either yearly or recently, because if your calibrator is incorrect, then your whole hatchery can get messed up. So I would just confirm that it is up to date and reading properly.
Yeah, that's a valuable tip for everyone, is that you want to make sure that instrument you are calibrating to is still in calibration. Exactly. Because that can mess everything up. So
that can be certified at James Way right now. I think we confirmed the temperature on our electrotherms that we sell in Cooper thermometers. They can be sent in here, and then there's other places you can send them.
Yeah, most major cities will have a calibration lab available for most kind of instruments, or you can always also contact manufacturers. They usually can also have you send it back to their office and calibrate there. So Jeff, I hope that helped. Let's stay on the multi-stage theme here. We received an email question from Richard. He is running Super J's with SST flats. His question is, when they measure at day 18 on that 6th rack, the last rows or the outside rows of the rack are measuring at about 100 to 100.3 eggshell temperature. The front rows of that same rack are measuring 101.3 to 102, so they've got quite a difference there. They're wondering how they can raise that last row by about 0.2 degrees Fahrenheit without affecting the temperature on the front row. They've tried increasing the overall temperature, but that increased temperatures throughout. And I also received some information from them that they are leveling the 6th position currently.
You deal with the SST flat more than I do.
Well, in other words, first thing I really emphasize the factor on the multi-stage machines that you really need to have that 60-40 ratio. Now with the SSTs, and there is more plastic in that flat or in those flats, but you really need to check those internal egg pressure to make sure that you do have that 60-40 ratio, because it's, again, I can't explain the importance, but also if you have gaps over 1/4 of an inch or what, 5 millimeters, is that right? And then 25?
Yes.
So you need to make sure you don't have gaps, because
Gaps where?
in between the racks.
In between racks.
In between the racks, because that's air slippage, and air is like water, the path of least resistance. So instead of going over the top all the way to the end, in other words, if you have, say, big gaps in between 2 or 3, it doesn't go all the way in and transfer the heat from the oldest back to the youngest. So it'll just, like I said, it's very important that you do that.
Okay.
So,
Just keep in mind, the shell temperature at any location should be very close to the same, the
Correct.
shell temperature, not the air.
Throughout your multi-stage
Throughout your
machine.
multi-stage machine, whether it's in the first position or it's the 6th, it's still shell temperature should be the same.
And what sort of target would we be looking for on shell temperature?
100,
100.1.
100.1.
Okay.
I'd just like to add to what Leonard has been on the pressure of that cabinet. The reason that we shoot for the 60-40 ratio is that it puts the air coming back through the eggs at the right speed. If you're out of balance, either higher at one end and lower at the other, the air can go through too fast, doesn't pick up the heat and move, or if it's out of balance the other way, it moves too slow, so it doesn't transfer that heat to
Back to the youngest.
efficiency. Yeah, so that's why we really push that because it's a tool that you can use to ensure that you're getting the correct airflow through that machine. It can also show if you have different fan problems, speeds, the fan where it's placed in the venturi, if you got air leakage. There's a lot of other useful information
Factors, yeah.
that it will show that you have an imbalance.
Now, going back to the leveling, we have one customer who's leveling 2 racks and one who is leveling only 1. What is the correct choice there, and does that depend on breed, flat?
Depends on temp heat. Let's face it, leveling the 6 rack has become a common practice, and actually the machine wasn't designed to level it. But if your heat is too much at the crossbar temperature, that was the reason behind leveling the 6th position. But that's the only position that should be leveled.
Correct.
Identify why the heat is building up. Why would you level the 5th?
But with the SSTs 5 and 6,
Yeah.
and that's in our addendum of the multi-stage machine. But it all depends on flat. I'll say that's the biggest thing between 5 and 6. And we have customers that have the SST flats, multi-stage machines, and they level. This is customer out west coast, but they level 5 and 6 on the SST flats.
Okay. And they're finding a better temperature evenness through the cabinet that way. Yeah. Yeah, so Richard, that might be something to try as well as leveling that position 5 as well, because you do have that SST flat installed there. Then we have something from Tony. Hi, Tony. Welcome. Thanks for joining us every time. He's asking, why is it not possible to edit the HatchSense profile from his HatchCom computer?
Phil, I'll let you've had more experience.
Is that?
Yeah, it's something I think I would have to look. I'd like to have the HatchCom up and take a look. So can I get back with him on that?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can definitely. We'll get back to you on that. Tony, and just check out how that is. And we could even possibly, if you'd like to hang around afterwards, you could probably team viewer in with you and take a look at your computer and see what's going on there. I have another question asking, what is the importance of the carbon dioxide sensors, and how can carbon dioxide be controlled in an incubator or a hatcher? Is it possible to retrofit older machines with a carbon dioxide sensor and control?
Older machines, what are you, is
it
it
multi-stage?
multi-stage or is it single stage? Multi-stage, no. There's no program in it. But all single stage from Jamesway can be retrofitted with carbon dioxide sensors to control the machine, not monitor. And we know there's benefits in controlling the machine with CO2, not monitoring it, controlling it.
So what are some of those benefits?
A stronger embryo, the blood circulatory system is more advanced, developed. You can break eggs and see it. At day 6, day 7, it's very obvious. And it's an effect on the eggshell or later periods of incubation and pipping.
And it deteriorates the eggshell and makes the pores bigger over the whole surface of the egg. So like Bill is saying, in the latter part, say from 11 days to 18 days, that chick develops 2/3 of its size, say that last 7 to 8 days. So like Bill's saying, it's very important.
And so then with that carbon dioxide control, we're using the damper to control the amount of, the damper position to control
Yes.
the amount of carbon dioxide in the cabinet.
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, it depends on the machines you have. Whether you have multi-stage, it wouldn't be something possible. But if you have a Jamesway single stage, we can talk more about how to get the carbon dioxide control on your machines. Richard just has responded back that they did try at one point leveling 5 and 6 and didn't find a great result, but they're going to check their spaces between the racks and pressures and see where that is, because of course I'm sure if those things were off, then the leveling effect would also not work properly.
Would compound just compound your issues.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Now, I attended a presentation by AVision last week here at the Ontario Hatchery Association, which was really interesting. And they were talking about candling and other things that we can learn from candling. So beyond identifying an egg with a chick versus a clear, what else can we learn from candling?
If you candle toward the end of transfer, you can visually look at the air cell size, see if it's where it needs to be, if it's had proper moisture loss. That would be one benefit. I often use that as a tool going into a hatchery at the transfer time, just to look.
So the air cell size would actually be correlated to our total moisture loss.
Yes.
And what are our moisture loss targets on single stage or multi-stage?
Well, on single stage, 9 to 11, and then multi-stage
11 to 13.
11 to 13.
11 to 13. So there is a difference there. That's interesting. Anything else that is valuable to be looking for during candling?
Oh, you can identify the small ends up very quickly. And, my area of the world basically is Asia, and all hand trade and very little automation. So I see sometimes as much as 1% small ends up. That's 1% hatches lost.
And then the benefits are by that one, in other words, upside down. In other words, you can really say manage your operations much better.
Correct.
Yeah, so you can provide that feedback back to the the group that is traying and make sure that, that they are watching for that. We don't have any questions right now. I think we've covered everything asked thus far. Any other general comments anyone wants to
Well,
make?
it's just, you know, the question on the pressures, and go back to that because that's probably one of the most important things that you can use in a multi-stage hatchery is the pressure. So that point needs to be across and people understand it. And go on our website and get the paper on how to do it. It's very self-explanatory because it gives you a world of information and you can manage your total machine with that. So we just need to stress that more.
Because, I mean, air is like water, path of least resistance, because like Bill's saying, if it's too fast, let's just say if you had a ratio of negative 75 and 25, that's too fast. And it is not, in other words, just by, with it being too fast, it doesn't pick up the needed embryo heat. This needs to be gone or sent back to the first and second and third positions. It is too fast. And then if it's at the right speed, in other words, it's just like I was emphasizing water, kind of like if, like say single stage, let's just use an example of a P129 and you have to, or you need say 5.5. And then you say, well, I've had a lot of people say, well, we've got 7. Well, 7's not necessarily better, but again, with the same factor like Bill's saying, in other words, it's too fast and it doesn't dissipate the heat away. In other words, because if you've got 7 gallons, that doesn't say mean, it's got, again, I'm saying the same principle.
Yeah, and you have the same principle, of course, in ventilation. We find if you have too much pressure on the front end or too much negative plenum pressure, so you have too large of a differential across a single stage machine, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to short circuit that air straight through the front, out the back, and it's never going to pass through the egg mass, and you're not going to get the effect of the air distributing the oxygen, removing the carbon dioxide, and dissipating some of the heat from those eggs. So.
Same with the multi-stage. If the pressure is too high, you cannot force air in that machine because fixed speed fan, that fan's only going to put so much air and then it starts slipping. But if it's not enough, zero pressure, the other thing happens, the machine has to suck the air in, so it's going to short circuit. So, you know, pressures is very, very important, whether it is on the intake or exhaust or internal pressure of the machine. You can manage the machine with that, especially the multi-stage, especially for taking the internal pressures.
Because I've seen a lot of machines that would be 50-50, 50 on the entrance end, 50 on the exit, and it's basically like stale. I mean, it's not going through. It's not going through the mass of eggs. But again, I emphasize you do have more mass, just way of design. But on the plastic SST flaps, you've got more.
Yeah.
In other words, you have more mass in that cabinet. So
yeah,
it's still
a little bit more resistant.
And it's back to the mix of eggs. You know, people sometimes get the idea, well, I'm going to put all of my young in one machine, all of my old, and all of my prime. Well, that means you have to micromanage. The machine's designed for a 60-20-20, basically. And that's 60 prime, 20 old, 20 young. And that's the heat load the machine was designed on, and the airflow the machine is designed on. So if that's the other thing you have to look at, to make sure you've got that ratio and not 100% old flocks in one machine or 100% young. Because when you do that, then you have to micromanage the machine and each machine.
Well, another thing, adding to what Bill's saying is, well, first is, question I have is, are the fan blades all 32-degree blades, or are they all 29s? Because if you cannot mix them, and you cannot have the spacers on the venturi when you say change your blades, or in other words, just like all tunnel machines now, you have no spacers for that venturi. So that's another thing to check.
For sure.
Old fan guards, new fan
Fan
guards.
guards, yes.
Fan guards have to be the same within that cabinet.
So many things that affects that pressure. You know, so many people save money by rewinding motors. But when you rewind a motor, check your RPMs. You're going to find that it's not going to be 1625.
Yeah, because the ratio that I've heard that every time you rewind them, you lose about 9% of your capacity.
Wow.
And the motor life is half or less.
Right.
I know that from experience 30 years ago.
Right.
It's you calculate it, buy a new motor. The benefits not there.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, none of our machines have only one fan, so it's not like you can make an independent change there. So I guess all changes need to be made the same throughout the cabinet. So if you're replacing your fan blades, they all need to be the same. Everything needs to match so that you don't have any discrepancy, because of course that will introduce a lack of balance to the airflow in that cabinet. So that's interesting. So in Platinum, what do we consider the most important thing to look at? If pressure is our most important thing in multi-stage, what's the key there to be keeping an eye on in your Platinum machines?
Be all four of your inputs, your chilled water flow, temperature, your hot water flow, temperature, your ventilation, good stable electricity. All of those really, because our controls now are digital and they're being controlled by electricity. That's why it has to be, it needs to be very reliable and stable.
But excuse me, Phil, but it's just like all your, let's say, well, you said the controls. See, we have 3-phase, and so basically we can provide anything of any customer around the world of what they would require electrically.
Yeah.
And again, like to something Victoria mentioned, make sure the instrument is calibrated, because you're calibrating a single stage machine day 1.5, and if it's off, the machine's going to run hot or cold for 18 days. And make sure it's accurate.
Yeah.
And at least with a single stage machine, you can actually test it yourself by running up the backup alarm. Empty machine.
Correct.
Run the temperature set point up to the backup alarm and see if your instrument's there. It's a quick check. It's not 100%, but it's quick.
101 or whatever.
That's right.
We do have a question from Derek. He's asking, he's also having an issue on his shell temperature in the multi-stage incubator at the back of the 6th rack. He says he's getting about 101. So what would we recommend so that he can get down to that 100.1 we're recommending for an eggshell temperature?
It's back to get the pressure first. That's the first thing. Make sure that air is moving properly so you get the pressure.
Yeah.
If the pressure is correct, then you have to start looking at different things. I think you'll find the pressure is not correct. If the air is moving too slow.
Again, like Bill's saying, I emphasize that 60-40 ratio. Some people get tired of me saying that it is so important about 60-40. But it is, and that's the way to say that the machine was designed with that 60-40 ratio of moving at the right speed. Again, going back to the right speed with air, same as with water, or gallons per minute.
Okay.
Laminar airflow.
And check the shell temperature on the entrance end. Because I have a feeling that if in one rack it's off, then the shell temperature on the entrance end is going to be really off.
Also, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because that heat's going to go.
Yeah.
So get the reference, and then you'll see.
So what sort of eggshell temperature is a danger zone? At what point are we really concerned that there's a major issue there?
It depends on the stage of incubation, because an early incubation can withstand higher temperatures. But in the 6th position, I think Leonard and Philip will agree that you get much above 102, not 100.2, but 102,
You're in trouble.
you're in trouble.
But that's so important too, like Bill's saying, but it's just like even after the birds hatch. In other words, the internal temperature, say, be 100.3 on average.
Right.
But whenever it starts getting up to, say, 100.5 or above, you will see the difference in quality of your chicks or birds.
Okay. So if we check our pressure, we don't have the 60-40. The things to check are fans the same?
Spacing of fans.
Fan spacing.
First thing is ventilation. First thing, check.
Start with your room pressure.
Start with the room pressure and the exhaust.
Yeah.
That's the very first step, and then get in the machine and take it apart.
And so our recommendations on the multi-stage for room pressure is 0.005 inches water column and up to 0.015. And then if you have an exhaust plenum on those multis, we are looking for referenced to the room, negative 0.015 to negative 0.025. And if you're referencing to the outside, your set point there is going to be different. It's going to be a negative 0.005 or negative up to negative 0.015. So room pressure, our fans, our rack spacing.
Gasket.
Temperatures in the
Gaskets.
feeding the air into the machine. In other words, what your temperature is feeding in. In other words, at your, say, multi-stage.
Mm-hmm.
The dampers, the entrance in and the exhaust damper, over a period of years, they start wearing out. I mean, they get out of position.
For sure.
And they must be at the same position on each end to get that 60-40. So that's a big thing that I normally see in machines that are out of balance. I'll find that the dampers have gotten off.
Well, when Philip mentions that, it just reminded me. In other words, sometimes whenever you've had, say, PT100 conversions or your PS501 conversions, I've found in different places where you didn't have what they call the energy strip on the intake or exhaust, or one may have be on, say, intake and then the exhaust.
Or crooked.
But in other words, that will throw your pressures off also.
So that seems to be, as Bill said, when we got everything else, that those two factors, that interest in and that exit in, have to line up. And usually there's no adjustment needed other than they have to have the correct distance from each other.
Yeah. So
1.5 or fully closed half inch.
Fully closed half inch, yeah.
yeah. So it's all about back to basics. Make sure your ventilation is right. Make sure your machine is in good working order. We have another question from Michael. He also has a multi-stage Super J's, I believe. He's asking, is there anything different with the fan location in the Venturi with the wide space fan guard or the narrow space guard? Or does the fan pitch make a difference with either guard?
There is different spacings.
And what we call U fan guard, in other words, where
That's the wide he's referring to.
okay, in other words, there's no spacers, and that's it's a spacing. I believe right off the top of my head, the half an inch for Super J's.
For the new fan.
For the new fan, or what they refer to as motor mounts, half an inch for Super J's. And again, that spacing is very important too, and that affects the pressure differential entrance exit in.
And I find it, and I always recommend if you're changing out your fan guards, keep the same fan guard in the machine.
Yes.
Try to keep one fan guard in one machine, whether it's all the old type for all the new style. All the same fan blade, 32s in one machine, or 29s
29 Super J's,
Super
27s for big J's.
in one machine. That way you're consistent and you can manage that machine. Hope that answers this question.
I think so. So can you use the 32, the 29, the 27 with either guard, or is there a restriction there?
Any guard,
Any yard. And just the fan blade spacings, that's the important part. Which,
the old guard also uses the spacers.
well, yes, yeah,
But then it's becoming obsolete. So
We do have some literature, maybe get his email address, or it may be on the website, I don't know, the proper blade with the proper big J, super J. And if he'll, we can send that information.
Yeah, Michael, we can definitely, we'll send that to you. Have your email, not a problem.
one little small thing, and this is on the safety factor for our customers. And I would still emphasize customers, wherever, they need to replace to the new motor mount, because people cannot get their fingers inside that guard. Not on the new one, they cannot. So just on the safety aspect, they really need to change them over.
Very good.
That is a good point. Now I see a couple names on here who will be or already are transferring from Super J's into P30 hatchers, into Platinums. Is there anything special they need to be thinking about there, going from a multi-stage into the single stage hatcher?
that is a very good combination.
Very good.
Very good.
I mean, Philip, you can talk about that where you and I and Jerry were a few years back, and transferred, in other words, multi-stage back into multi-stage, and then transferred multi-stage into P30's particular hatcher. And Philip can tell you that, in other words, the quality was different. It's just night and day, being better. Yes. I mean, they can still transfer in the same pattern and everything, but
The quality is definitely a big improvement. Part of that is we can control the climate much better in a Platinum hatcher. We can cool it down after the hatch is complete, and hold your chicks till you're ready to remove them.
That gives you the opportunity to use hatch sense
That's true
to
too.
narrow your window down.
well, Philip, we had one, in other words, where we used hatch sense,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other one we didn't, and you can see the differences in the quality with the hatch sense.
And also, I think we got 24-hour hatch window, 26-hour window out of that, whereas a normal Multistage, we see a 30-hour
30-hour.
hatch window. So again, if you have a chick out 6 hours early, and then we have to hold that chick for a whole another 30 hours before it's removed, that's where the quality, I think, you see, is that you're able to delay those early hatches and tighten them up with the regular hatch.
That makes sense. Now, is there a different profile you would be running if you were transferring from multi-stage, or would you just run?
Yes. You would need the 30-hour window unless you used a hatch sense.
Right.
The hatch sense would be the same, but if you're coming out, and also you got to keep in mind, you're coming out of two separate machines. Then machines got to be set at the same time. They can't be staggered like you normally stagger them. They have to be set at the same time, because you want them chicks hatching at the same time.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in case someone isn't quite familiar, can you guys explain a little bit more about hatch sense and how that works, or what it does?
We'll let our resident,
Mr. Perry.
he's our resident expert on hatch
Oh my
sense.
gosh. We've had a lot of success with hatch sense, not only in chickens, we've seen benefit in turkeys and also in ducks. What it does, it has a motion sensor that detects movement when your first chicks start to hatch. And when it sees that, what we're going to try to do is start slowing down that early hatch and tighten it up with our peak hatch. And one of the ways that it does that. I guess really two ways, but one thing is we drop the temperature down to about 97, 96 degrees. We make the chicks very comfortable at that point. And then we also allow our CO2 to go to about 3,000 parts per million at that time. So what we've done, we've really made these embryos very comfortable and said, okay, guys, stop hatching. We want you to hold on.
Or make them dormant.
Yeah. And so it runs through this process for 12 hours. And then at the end of that period, we take the temperature up to 98 degrees. And we also allow CO2 to build up to 8,000 parts per million. And we'll run this for a period of time. And this just makes things start hatching. Everything just, the rise in that hatch is very rapid. At that point, when we get to the peak of the hatch, the motion sensor is no longer needed. I'll back up. The motion sensor is looking for movement in 2 trays, and that's when it starts when it detects that the hatch has started, the early hatch. So the next thing that it does, when your humidity rises and peaks, it starts looking for the decline in humidity as your hatch starts on the end, toward the end. And what this does, it'll ramp up one more short burst of high temperature and CO2. We don't run the CO2 quite as high because we've got most of our chicks out. And then once we do that, it just we start dropping our temperature to like a regular platinum profile down to 95 Fahrenheit or whatever you want to hold at. But I think, we wouldn't say that our window is extremely shortened, but the quality of chick that it produces by slowing down the early hatching, I think is where we see the benefits. Most hatch windows, I see 21 hours with the hatch sense. It's not, we're not, like I say, seeing a whole lot, but the quality of putting all those together. And we have learned that, you can have heat on the way up as your hatch peaks, but we definitely want to start taking that heat off as it completes and hold those chicks comfortable.
Now, is HatchSense, is that something, I know it's available on our P2s, is it available on P1s, backwards compatible to
Back
that?
to P1s.
It's a retrofit.
It's like Bill said, it's a retrofit that you can convert your P1s, yes.
Okay. Okay.
And update the software.
Yeah, also software update.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for joining me. I admit Multistage is definitely not my strong point, and I think I've learned a lot about it today. So that's great. Thank you everyone for all your questions. This has really been very informative. And thanks for that, those who emailed in and those who participated today. As with all our webinars, you should be getting a link in about a week if you want to watch it again or share it with someone else in your organization. And then in about 2 weeks, we'll have it up on YouTube. So then it can be shared as well, and it will be there probably forever. I don't know. And you can watch it there. If you have any suggestions, comments, questions, suggestions on topics you'd like to see in the new year, we're going to be deciding our new year topics here shortly. Please go ahead and send those to me at webinars@jamesway.com, and we can look into those.